In the previous episode in this series, we talked about the events unfolding in the northeastern part of Middle-earth, focusing on the dwarves of Erebor, elves of the Woodland Realm, and the humans of Dale, culminating at the Battle of Five Armies. That battle was one of the first in the larger War of the Ring, and in a way propelled the events forward more than anything else. Elsewhere in Middle-earth, the Dark Lord is stirring and is surrounding the free peoples with his minions. Welcome to another episode in our series, where we will talk about the Fellowship of the Ring and the Battle of Osgiliath. There's another Dark Lord stirring these days, fortunately contained within the best mobile game around, Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of this video, with a special offer at the link in the description. It's Malek Kavar, champion of the Void Keep, who destroys his enemies not with armies, but with a more insidious force, poison. He was a priest of light who got exiled after his dabbles with darkness, and he's pretty mad about all that. You need to cleanse debuffs constantly to make it through, but if you do, he gives a nice supply of void potions to ascend your champions. Raid's got loads on this month, including a fresh rotation of the brutal Hydra boss, events and tournaments every day, and special Valentine's Day events that lead you to a brand new champion. That's if the 600 plus champions already available aren't enough for you, but then again, with so many massive PvE boss battles and global PvP, you can never have too many options. It's a better time than ever to get started in Raid, and if you click our link in the description or scan our QR code here, you'll get some cool bonuses: a free epic champion Tyrell, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon up champions as soon as you're in the game. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. Throughout the Third Age, the kingdoms of Gondor and Rohan continued to grow closer as allies. However, the increasing influence of Sauron led to coordinated attacks against the remaining human kingdoms, preventing them from helping each other. The Dunlendings, who were the original inhabitants of Calenardon, which became Rohan, were driven north by Orl's people and proved to be a threat. Invading the region from the west, they took the abandoned Númenórean fortress of Isengard in 2710 of the Third Age. Rohan was then ruled by King Helm Hammerhand. One of his vassals, Freyka, was growing strong in the west, and in 2754 demanded the hand of Helm's daughter for his son Wulf. The king refused and mocked Freyka, which prompted a duel between the two, during which the noble was killed. Enraged, Helm declared Freyka's family the enemies of the king, forcing Wulf to run away and join the Dunlendings. We don't know how, but Wulf soon became the leader of the Dunlendings and built an alliance with the Easterlings and the Corsairs of Umbar, possibly helped by Sauron. During the so-called Long Winter of 2758, Corsairs and Haredrim attacked Gondor, preventing it from coming to Rohan's aid, while Wulf and his allies attacked the Horse Lords. Unable to defend against the overwhelming numbers, Helm was defeated at the crossings of Isen. The majority of the Rohirrim fled to the fortress Suthburg, which would be known as Hornburg or Helm's Deep afterwards, while Edoras was defended by the king's son, Haleth. Wulf soon killed Haleth and took the capital, declaring himself the king. His armies besieged Suthburg, leading to a long and costly winter investment. It is said that Helm fought ferociously, leading countless sallies against the enemy, but hunger and dwindling numbers were too much, and sometime in early 2759 the king died, along with many of his people. The details are lost, but the siege was lifted either by the Rohirrim or because the Dunlendings got tired of maintaining it. Regardless, the long winter was finally over in March of 2759, and Helm's nephew, Freolaf Hildason, used the spring floods and led a contingent of Rohirrim down from Dunharrow, where a group of his people had survived, towards Edoras. Taking the Dunlendings entirely by surprise, they routed the defending force, killing Wulf and successfully reclaiming their capital. It is at this point a force of Gondorians joined with Freolaf's troops, and their combined might prevailed over the invaders, sending them back to the western wastes. Freolaf was then crowned king, with an unlikely visitor coming to the coronation, Saruman the White, greatest of the wizards of Middle-earth, bearing gifts and expressing admiration for the courage of the Horse Lords. Seeing the weaknesses in the western defences of Rohan, Steward of Gondor, Beren, bestowed the fortress of Isengard to Saruman alongside the Palantir and all other items which could be found within its ancient walls. Freyaleth was happy with this arrangement, as the war had been costly in terms of men and horses, while Saruman would provide a stable ally and wise counsel. Further issues arose for the Rohirrim, as the Orcs, who had been driven from the north during the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, found their way to Rohan. This led to numerous raids and much suffering on the part of the Horse Lords, until the destruction of the last great Orc hold in Rohan by King Folka in TA 2864. It was under the reign of Folka's son, Folkwine, that Rohan finally returned to its earlier stability and strength. Fortunately, this was just in time for the Rohirrim to aid Gondor when the Haradrim invaded yet again in 2885. Folkwine sent his sons, Folkred and Fastred, to lead the forces of Rohan against an immense army of the Haradrim. Although the combined forces of Gondor and Rohan ultimately prevailed at the Battle of the Crossing of Poros, the allies' losses were immense, and both Folkred and Fastred were slain. So it was Folkwine's youngest son, Fengel, who took up the crown of Rohan, weakening the kingdom by squabbling with his advisors and warriors alike, undoing much of the work of his father. Meanwhile, in what was formerly Arnor, the descendants of the last king of Edui, now known as the Dunedain, protected the remaining inhabitants of the region from the horrors surviving these great northern wars. They were known as the Rangers of the North, highlighting the ignorance of the men and hobbits who populated the land. Aranath, the son of the last king of Arnor, had taken up the mantle of chieftain of the Dunedain, and since his passing there had been 16 more such chieftains. Hunters in the dark and protectors of the people, they slew orcs and abominations, unwilling to surrender to the tide of evil. With each conflict their numbers dwindled, and by the chieftainship of Arathorn, the once mighty defenders of the north were a mere shadow of their former prowess. However, Arathorn's son, Aragorn II, would prove to be the greatest of their number. Following the death of Arathorn during a battle with an orc raiding party, the 2-year-old Aragorn was sent to Rivendell to be fostered by his distant relative Elrond. However, at the request of his mother, his lineage was kept a secret. When he was 20, it was revealed that he was the last descendant of Anarion and Isildur's one true heir, with Elrond bestowing upon the young man the shards of Narsil. It was also around this time the young chieftain met and fell in love with Elrond's daughter, Arwen. Aragorn met with the wizard Gandalf the Grey in 2956, and the latter advised him to instruct the Dunedain to guard the Shire, where the hobbits lived, at all costs. From 2957 to 2980, Aragorn served in the army of Rohan using the name Thorongil under the newly crowned King Thengel, and met the young Prince Theoden. He fought with such valor that it increased the morale of the Free Peoples and actively countered the rising strength of Mordor in the east. Unfortunately, at this time Saruman's use of the Palantir led to his corruption by Sauron. He began to make trouble for the Rohirrim and openly declared himself to be the Lord of Isengard. Sauron, fully ensconced in his fortress at Barad-dûr, was breeding massive armies of orcs, and drawn to him were his most powerful servants, the 9 Ringwraiths. The preparations for the coming war were nearing completion. Aragorn then moved to Gondor, becoming a lieutenant in the army, and beloved by his men, he led a force to Umbar in 2980, burning the Corsair fleet and preventing an invasion of Gondor. However, soon after, he left his post to the disappointment of his men and went east. Arriving in Lorien, he asked Arwen to marry him. His proposal was accepted, but Elrond refused his permission until such a time that Aragorn would be king of Arnor and Gondor. Meanwhile, Gandalf visited his old friend Bilbo during his 111th birthday in 3001 and convinced the Hobbit to leave the ring to his nephew Frodo, with Bilbo embarking on one of his final journeys to Rivendell, where he would enjoy some well-earned rest. Gandalf at this stage had become increasingly suspicious of the ring, fearing that it may in fact be more than just a mere ring of power. Gandalf asked Aragorn to leave the Rangers to watch over the Shire and hunt down the previous owner of the ring, Gollum. In 3017, Aragorn captured Gollum in the Dead Marshes and brought him to the halls of Thranduil in Mirkwood. Gollum was questioned by Gandalf here, revealing that he had earlier been captured and interrogated by the Dark Lord, revealing the words Shire and Baggins during his torture. Alarmed by this, Gandalf made with all haste to the Shire, and in his absence, an orc attack allowed Gollum to escape and make his way to the mines of Moria. Gandalf's suspicions started to be confirmed. The full strength of Mordor had returned, and the weakened states of Rohan and Gondor were at a severe disadvantage, as Sauron both had superior numbers and managed to surround them by enemies on all sides. Sauron was also an adept strategist, and while his initial plans to utilize Smaug had been rendered impotent by Gandalf and his company, he still held the upper hand. The Dark Lord decided to use his strength to destroy the Kingdom of Gondor, which was his strongest opponent despite years of decay and stagnation at the hands of the Stewards. Osgiliath was a shell of its former glory following years of war, and the increased importance and focus placed upon the new capital of Minas Tirith. It would be vital in any such attack on Gondor. Positioned on the Anduin River, it provided the only proper crossing point for hundreds of miles, either up or downstream. Half of the city lay on either side of the river, and as such it would prove no easy task to take the fortress city. If the city should fall, it would open up the Gondorian capital to a direct assault, which at this stage of the war may have proved fatal given the disunity of the forces of man. Sauron, however, was extremely patient, and rather than reveal the utmost extent of his forces, preferred to use the assault as a probing one in order to test the strength of the steward Denethor II, who he had begun to influence through the Palantir years earlier. This also provided the perfect cover for the Nazgul to cross the Anduin unnoticed in their journey towards the Shire in search of the ring. The first true battle of the War of the Ring began with a massive army of orcs, Easterlings and Haradrim, led by the Witch King of Angmar himself, assaulting the eastern bank. The sons of the Steward and captains of Gondor, Boromir and Faramir, were entirely blindsided by this assault, but they managed to hastily mount a defense, showing skill and valor. Soon, the untold numbers began to weigh upon the disciplined professional soldiers of Gondor, who were supported by the Rangers of Ithilien. Unable to hold their ground, the Gondorians were pushed right back up until the riverbank by the former King of Angmar's forces. Seeing no other alternative, Faramir and Boromir gave the order for the last bridge over the Anduin to be destroyed, while they led a desperate rearguard action, hoping to buy enough time for the bridge to be brought down. The fighting was fierce as the stalwart Gondorians refused to give an inch, willing to fight to the last man, as each and every one of them were aware of what the consequences of their failure might be. Fortunately, it was just enough to save the western portion of the city, and seeing that the bridge had been destroyed, the two brothers, alongside the surviving 2 soldiers of their company, launched themselves into the powerful flow of the Anduin and just about managed to swim to the other bank. The eastern portion of the city was now fully under Sauron's control, opening up the possibility of the entire city falling. Gandalf at this point received news from another wizard, Radagast the Brown, that his presence was requested by his superior, Saruman the White. Gandalf wrote a letter to Frodo, urging him to leave the Shire with all haste before making his way to Isengard. His message arrived just in time, and Frodo, accompanied by fellow hobbits Samwise Gamgee, Peregrine Took and Meriadoc Brandybuck, barely evaded the Nazgul, who had been sent to capture him and take the ring. When the hobbits reached the Prancing Pony Inn in Bree, they were dismayed to discover that Gandalf was not there. They were instead greeted by a mysterious ranger known as Strider. Unbeknownst to them, Saruman had been swayed by the Dark Lord and desired the power of the ring for himself, and when Gandalf refused to join him, Saruman imprisoned Gandalf the Grey on the highest level of his tower, Orthanc. Gandalf was rescued by his dear friend, the leader of the Great Eagles, Gwaihir. Meanwhile, Aragorn was escorting the hobbits towards Rivendell. At the watchtower of Weathertop, they were attacked by the Nazgûl, with the Witch King stabbing Frodo before Aragorn could drive them off. This put Frodo's life in immediate danger, forcing the group to move with all haste towards Rivendell in order to avail of elvish healing, with the Ringwraiths in pursuit. They were met by the Elf Lord Glorfindel, who drove off 4 Nazgûl chasing them, escorting the party to the ford of the Bruinen. Here, Elrond unleashed a flood, driving off the servants of Sauron and buying them enough time to save Frodo's life. So began the Council of Elrond on October 25, 3018, wherein the representatives of the Free Peoples discussed what to do with the ring. Eventually, it was decided that it had to be destroyed in Mount Doom, where it was forged. Dorth, Gimli, son of Gloin, Elven Prince of the Woodland Realm, Legolas, and Boromir of Gondor joined Frodo, Merry, Pippin, Sam, Aragorn and Gandalf, becoming known as the Fellowship of the Ring. On the 25th of December, they set out from Rivendell upon a quest that would determine the fate of all of Middle-earth. Unable to traverse the Gap of Rohan due to the proximity of Saruman, and also blocked from taking the Pass of Caradhras due to a snowstorm conjured by the aforementioned wizard, they were forced to take the path of the Mines of Moria. They barely survived an attack by the Watcher in the Water, and their journey continued, and a number of days later they came upon the chamber of Mazarbul, with Gollum tailing them through the entire ordeal, wherein stood the tomb of Balin, who had served in the company of Thorin Oakenshield and attempted to retake his ancestral home, but died with his comrades in the process. Unfortunately, Pippin's clumsiness revealed the presence of the Fellowship, and a battle ensued as a company of orcs, led by a troll, attempted to storm the chamber. The group won the battle and fled. However, it was not just orcs which Pippin had awoken. Durin's Bane, the last of the great Balrogs of Morgoth, now pursued them. Reaching the bridge of Khazad Dûm, the Balrog revealed itself, and Gandalf the Grey stepped forward to meet it, shouting aloud, "You cannot pass! I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Udun, go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." Baiting the Balrog onto the narrow bridge above the chasm, he smote it with his staff and cast the fiery beast down, before being caught by its whip and dragged in. His last words to his companions were, "Fly, you fools." Elsewhere, Saruman had finally forged an army in order to set himself up as an equal to Sauron. In doing so, he had torn down the trees within Isengard and the surrounding area in order to fuel his forges of industry. He ordered Orcish and Dunlending raids upon the ailing kingdom of Rohan, whose king he had begun to corrupt and sway towards inaction and frailty. The culmination of his experiments on the orcs was the fighting Uruk-hai, a breed of half-orc, half-humans, who were many times stronger than their orcish brethren. Yet the true core of their strength lay in the fact that, unlike the orcs, they were totally unaffected by sunlight. Making use of this vital characteristic, he dispatched the strongest of his experiments to hunt down the Fellowship. Aragorn, who was now leader of the company, brought them to Lothlorien, where they were greeted by Galadriel, the fairest of all the elves. Frodo offered her the ring, but she resisted the temptation, instead aiding the Fellowship, bestowing upon them a number of gifts. The Fellowship passed the famous statues of Argonaths and continued down the river Anduin, setting up camp on the western side of the Lake of Nen Hithol. Unfortunately, Boromir had been slowly seduced by the power of the ring. Despite his innate virtues, the weakness that had swayed Isildur so many years before was alive in him. Giving in to his weakness, he attempted to take the ring from Frodo, but the Hobbit put on the ring and used the invisibility it was granting to hide from the Captain of Gondor. Realizing that his actions were due to the taint of the One Ring, Boromir returned to the camp, sorrowful for what had just transpired between himself and the Ringbearer, only to be confronted by Aragorn. Attempting to present his version of events, the rest of the Fellowship clearly believed that there was more to the argument. However, Aragorn refused to press the issue further. The Fellowship then scattered in a misguided attempt to find the Ringbearer, with Boromir being tasked with protecting Merry and Pippin, while Aragorn raced after Sam, who feared desperately for Frodo's safety. Fleeing from the initial encounter with Boromir, and believing he should now take the ring by himself, Frodo met with Samwise Gamgee, who refused to let his dear friend depart without him, and both of them crossed to the eastern bank. This was only allowed by the distraction caused by Merry and Pippin, who had run into a group of Uruk-hai. Boromir came to their aid, and was initially able to drive off the party of orcs. More and more Uruks came to assault the group, however, believing the two hobbits to be the ones they had been tasked with retrieving by Saruman. Fighting like a man possessed, Boromir held off swathes of Uruk-hai warriors, while the two hobbits threw stones at the oncoming enemy forces in order to earn their companion some more time. Unable to defeat Boromir in hand-to-hand combat, the Uruk-hai proceeded to shoot at him with black arrows from behind, eventually bringing the Gondorian down, though not before he broke his blade in combat, slaying one more Uruk before he could stand no longer. He did not die, though, and was forced to look on as the hobbits were taken, the Uruk-hai now taking them to their master in Isengard and what they believed to be the Ringbearer. Aragorn arrived first, with all of the Uruk-hai having already left, and came upon his now dying companion, who lay against a tree, pierced all over by black arrows and carrying his broken sword. His final words to Aragorn before he passed urged the heir of Isildur to take up the mantle only he could truly carry. "Farewell, Aragorn. Go to Minas Tirith and save my people. I have failed." With this passed Boromir, the eldest son of the steward Denethor. The remnants of the shattered Fellowship prepared a short funeral for their fallen brother, placing his body alongside his shattered horn and sword before allowing the tide to bring him over the falls and unto rest, before turning towards Rohan and giving pursuit in order to recover the captured hobbits. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam continued their journey ever eastwards, stalked by a cunning Gollum and entirely unsure of the way they must take. The Fellowship was no more, and the darkness was surrounding the free peoples from all sides. Yet hope was not lost, and the next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the increasingly desperate battles of the War of the Ring. We're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely. And don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.